So I suppose in a way, this links back to our previous question, what we've just said about how, well, different models offer different things. So we have to take different approaches to group sessions and group reflection, I suppose, for a variety of reasons. I think, well, one thing is every group's going to be different, you know, and the purpose is going to be different. So you might have a group of senior managers, or you might have a group of students or a group of practitioners, or you might have a very mixed group. And so, you know, with a senior manager and some practitioners and some students and some, you know, so it's the group is going to be different. So you've got to tailor the approach to the group. But also you're going to want to use different approaches at times. I mean, I suppose I always like, whenever I'm doing a group session, to always draw something out at the end of it that connects people, each of the individuals in that session. There's something that connects them. And so that's where the reflective connections model came in there, about those drawing out the connections together. So I always like to do that, but then I like to use different methods of reflection or different models to structure the conversations, or you know, so I'm just thinking about sessions I've done recently, and one session that I really like to do at the moment is, especially because people are working from home, you know, I ask people to, I introduce the activity, and then we have 10 minutes away from the computer screen. And during that 10 minutes, they need to find an object that they bring back that says, look, here's how I'm feeling about my work at the moment. And sometimes people bring something that's really literal, you know, like, I don't know, somebody's bought a rubbish bin and I feel a bit rubbish, and it's, you know, full of rubbish. And sometimes people, it's a lot more just a kind of analogy, and it's a lot more reflective, and it's a lot more, but then drawing the connections out between the objects at the end, and then that gives a connection between feelings, is a really lovely way of working. So you've still got that overall approach of, here's the connectivity, but every method that I use is different. And it might be because, well, I worked with this group a month or 6 weeks ago, so I want to use a different method. Or it might just be that I want to keep it fresh, so I'm using a different method if I'm facilitating it. Because if I use the same method every time, I'm going to get bored of that, and I'm going to get, you know, and everything needs to be creative and mixed up and kept fresh. So I think that's why you need to use different approaches and go about things in a different way. But for me, one of the underlying things has to be, how do we get everybody to equally contribute? Because I think very often in any kind of group conversation, whether it's a reflection or anything else, you know, some people will talk a lot and some people will take a backseat and not talk much at all. And I think one of the big advantages for me of this new online way of working is it makes it really easy, because you give each person a number of minutes and everybody else is on mute. And so you don't get that where people are jumping in, and you can put some very simple rules in place that mean everyone contributes. So I suppose they're the two underlying things that I try and make sure of in so they're I suppose an overall approach that never changes, is making sure everyone has space, and making sure that somehow I give some connectivity between all of the group members. But then otherwise, I think it's really important to just mix everything up, to keep it fresh and to keep it reflective and to keep it in some ways fun. You know, reflection, when we're thinking about it as self-care, it should be fun, it should be exciting, it should have something to offer. It shouldn't feel like a chore, because when it feels like a chore, you're never going to do it on your own, you know. So I suppose they're my thoughts about group reflections. But I mean, you've had a lot of experience of delivering some group sessions during the project work, so you know, what are your thoughts about different approaches?
Yeah, I suppose it's been really good actually, because we've had the opportunity to try different things. And I think historically, there's always been that, like you say, maybe an action learning set type of group session where one person brings a case, and it can be quite daunting for people, really. So we started off with that kind of approach, and we thought, okay, how can we maybe look at it a little bit differently? So we did come up with a new approach to that kind of action learning, which we brought in a clear model. So that comes from coaching. And what we liked about that is that it offered just a little bit of structure, really. So it starts with contracting, listening, exploring, and then moving on to action and review. But again, I think there's always a danger with that kind of approach, that you can fall into that trap that we do as social workers sometimes, of trying to fix things and say, have you done this? Did you try this? Rather than allowing that space for somebody to really reflect. So I think there's definitely a space for all the different types of group approaches. And we definitely played about with a bit of that. And then we thought about, okay, how could we do it differently? So I began then doing some sessions where I would do a bit of kind of sharing information and using reflection in the same session. So we'd pick a specific topic, which might have been about reflective practice, or it might have been about something within the project to do with outcomes, or and then we'd have a discussion about some of the learning behind that and some of the information. And then we'd have a lot of kind of group discussions then about what that meant to them, how they'd use certain things in their practice. So I really liked that then, that we were kind of using things and everybody was kind of offering something and taking that time. And then later on in the project, I came across the reflective connections model, and you were doing some training. Gosh, it's going back a while now, maybe a year ago. And I saw it advertised and thought, oh, that's something that could work really well for our project. And I think instantly, I just felt an instant connection with what it offered as a model. One, because obviously it could be done online, and that's something that then we could continue with the project. But two, because it gave everybody the same opportunity. It wasn't that pressure on one person to do a lot of the talking. But not only that, I think that it brings that sense of actually you're practicing using models, you're practicing your active listening and that communication, which is so important and one of the main elements of the project, really. And then it brought that sense of connection, and people really value that. Just one, having the time, but also number two, just hearing other people's stories. And there's so much to learn from it. And I think I felt so privileged just to be able to be a part of that, to facilitate the sessions, because you're hearing a lot of the time as social workers, we talk about things that we found difficult rather than the things that went well. So you're hearing about a lot of the anxiety, a lot of emotions, a lot of the difficulties that people have found in work. But at the same time, you're also seeing kind of what people are getting out of that, what they've taken from it, those learning moments, and how that is going to then be applied in their own practice. So I think there's a lot to be said, really, for that model that you've developed with Bridget.
I think listening to you there, though, I kind of learn from listening about how another reason that different approaches are important is that at different times we need to have different things in place, and sometimes something runs its course. So, and there's a place for all of those things that you did, each of those different ways of having reflective conversations with teams, or even with just workers who are not all in the same team, the way in which you've done it differently. But at different times it kind of runs its course. So you do that, everybody brings a situation, has a conversation about it, but then people start to think, oh, I've done that before, I don't need to go, and you'll get people not buying into it. So I think if you keep it mixed up and you keep it new and you keep it fresh each time, people don't know what's coming, what we're going to do this session, so I think that's really important. And I think one of the things that I've enjoyed doing really as working in this new online way is finding lots of different methods for groups, and then thinking about, okay, how do I use, and how might that method be useful to them in their own practice? And because all of those methods are, the one I mentioned earlier about the object, there's nothing to stop you doing that with a young person, to say, is there an object that represents how you're feeling? And it's just that it builds on the idea of third object theory. And so, but every technique that you use, there needs to be a variety of ways in which that can be used, I think. And there's a time and a place for every approach, isn't there, and every way of working.
Yeah, definitely.